Let's bring in our good friend now, Yvonne Davis, our international relations expert, who is also a presidential appointee for President George W. Bush. But you had your moments with his father. Good to have you here with us.
Many, many moments. I first met President George H.W. Bush in 1998 in Houston, Texas. And I can share that when I come back on. But the most pressing moment when he died, because it was very emotional for me, was when I had dinner with the Bushes at a friend of theirs' home with Governor Jeb Bush, and it was the three of us on the couch. It was me, it was First Lady Barbara Bush, and George H.W. Bush. And it was such a memory for me because there was this expensive Persian rug and there was water spilled all over the floor, and he's like, Barb, stamp it out, stamp it out. So I'm using my foot and stamping. They're using their foot and stamping. Finally, Jeb said, okay, it's fine.
It's water.
And so we had this discussion about my life, my family, my brother who served under President Clinton in Kosovo, my grandfather who was a World War II hero. And so it was just such a personal moment, and the First Lady Barbara addressed me as dear, more about you, dear. And so when I was leaving and I stood up and I gave them a big hug, it was President Bush that looked me in the eye, says, when you see my son, because they knew what I was doing in Washington back and forth, would you please give him a big hug and tell him that I love him?
Yeah.
And the emotional person that I am, tears welled up in my eyes, and I said I would. 2 weeks later, I did that. President George W. Bush gave me a hug and a kiss and said, you know, I love my dad, too. And so those are the type of moments you have in a sphere where there's a lot of politics, but the goodness of America comes through a president like this. Yeah. And so when I learned of his death, it was emotional for me, truly it was. And so, and the opportunities to get to know such a family, and if you really look at it, they're really the royal family of the United States of America, when you look at its generational leadership, etc. But the last farewell address that President George H.W. Bush has given to this nation is in the celebration of his life by having this funeral today. Okay. And that farewell address is the address for decency. Yeah. For all America, for the world, because he was truly one of the greatest world leaders.
I wanted to know if you could highlight some of the president's foreign policy, because I know you're so familiar. Obviously, you've worked with both presidents, as we've heard from your relationship, but sort of highlight some of them.
Yes. I would say that he was a pragmatist, a conservative pragmatist. In other words, what he did was he didn't make rash decisions. He would take his time. But when he made a decision, he was very firm. Case in point would be in Panama in 1989 with Manuel Noriega. Manuel Noriega, as you know, was a spy for the CIA. And then, of course, during his corrupt process, they were funneling drugs into the United States. So he became a strongman. And so President George H.W. Bush launched Operation Just Cause, where they sent 10,000 troops into Panama to remove him. And so in that context, once he made a decision, he was firm. I found it to be a big misnomer to call him a weak president or a soft president, because when he made the case for war for Operation Desert Shield in 1990, he talked about, St. Augustine calls it the just war. And so once he was firm about this, and of course it's always harrowing to send our men and women in harm's way, he was very clear, and this was clearly the last war the United States has actually decisively won. And so when you look at even his public diplomacy related to China with Tiananmen Square, they could have sent troops in, but he didn't. He chose diplomacy. So he always was an even hand, but he was always fair in terms of declaring the New World Order, which talked about a coalition of collective security that is multinational. And this is what the president started.
I would love to talk to you more. Hopefully we can.
I have more stories.
I know. Normally we're off the air in about 18 minutes, but our coverage will continue throughout the morning, so maybe we can talk to you again. That is good. Yvonne Davis, certainly our international relations expert, knows so much. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.